In a landmark decision, the Supreme Court has blocked former President Donald Trump's Patriot Tariff initiative, halting sweeping new duties on imported goods. The ruling marks a pivotal moment in the debate over presidential authority and trade, signaling that the judiciary will enforce constitutional limits on executive power. The announcement sent shockwaves through markets, with business leaders and investors reacting to the sudden shift. Trump's tariffs, a core part of his economic platform, were intended to protect American industries, but faced fierce opposition over fears of higher consumer prices and global retaliation. The court's intervention shifts the debate from politics to constitutional law, questioning the extent of executive power under the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. The justice's decision reflects growing concern over unchecked executive authority in economic matters. This ruling not only blocks a single policy, but sets a precedent, reshaping the balance of power in future trade negotiations. The Patriot Tariff Initiative was the culmination of Donald Trump's America First economic philosophy, prioritizing domestic production and bilateral deals over global agreements. Trump's earlier tariffs on steel, aluminum, and Chinese goods were precursors, but this plan was even more ambitious, proposing a 10% baseline tariff on most imports, with up to 60% on goods from certain countries. Supporters saw it as a bold move to reshore industries and rebuild American manufacturing, arguing that decades of free trade had hollowed out the heartland. They believed only decisive action could reverse this trend. Opponents, including economists and business groups, warned the tariffs would act as a massive tax on American families, raising prices on everything from electronics to groceries. They predicted swift retaliation from trading partners, threatening millions of export-related jobs. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce called the plan a self-inflicted wound. The proposal ignited fierce debate, dividing not just parties but the Republican Party itself, exposing a rift between free market conservatives and economic nationalists. The controversy became a battle for the nation's economic sole protectionism versus global integration. The stakes were not just economic, but ideological, shaping the future of American conservatism. The tariff plan's divisiveness underscored the deep uncertainty about America's place in the global economy. The Supreme Court's decision centered on whether the president overstepped authority granted by Congress in imposing sweeping tariffs. Petitioners argued the plan violated the Commerce Clause, which gives Congress, not the president, power over foreign trade. The court agreed, citing the non-delegation doctrine. Congress cannot hand over broad legislative powers without clear guidelines. The justices found the national security justification for the tariffs too vague and expansive, risking unchecked executive power. While past presidents used targeted tariffs for specific industries, the Patriot Tariff Initiative was so broad it amounted to rewriting economic law, something reserved for Congress. This ruling reasserts judicial oversight in trade, setting a new boundary for presidential authority. The president retains a role in trade negotiations, but the power to impose sweeping tariffs remains with Congress. The decision sends a clear message. The executive cannot unilaterally reshape the nation's economic framework. Data from recent years reveals the real impact of tariffs on the U.S. economy. The Congressional Budget Office found that Trump-era tariffs raised consumer prices and reduced real household income, especially for middle and lower-income families. While some domestic industries saw short-term gains, most U.S. manufacturers faced higher costs for imported components, squeezing profits or raising prices. Retaliatory tariffs from China and the EU hit American exports hard, especially in agriculture, costing farmers billions and prompting federal bailouts. Studies show the net effect of tariffs has been negative, with costs passed to consumers and little benefit to overall employment or production. The National Bureau of Economic Research concluded that the full cost of the 2018 to 2019 tariffs was borne by Americans, with no clear economic upside. These findings fueled opposition to the Patriot Tariff Initiative, warning that expanding tariffs would amplify economic harm. The evidence suggests tariffs create winners and losers, but the broader economy suffers. The debate is not just theoretical. Real families and businesses feel the impact. The numbers made clear why the stakes were so high in the Supreme Court's decision. Despite criticism, the Patriot Tariff initiative had strong backing from many Americans and industry groups. Supporters argued that focusing solely on prices ignored the bigger picture: national security and long-term economic resilience. They blamed decades of free trade for eroding America's industrial base and making the nation dangerously dependent on foreign suppliers. Labor unions saw tariffs as essential to protect jobs and communities, pointing to shuttered factories as evidence of globalism's failures. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed vulnerabilities in supply chains, reinforcing the argument that economic security is national security. Proponents claimed tariffs would spur domestic investment in critical sectors, making the U.S. less vulnerable to future crises. They dismissed fears of trade wars, insisting America's market power would force fairer global trade. For them, short-term pain was worth long-term strength and independence. Opponents of the Patriot Tariff initiative warned of dire economic consequences. Economists, business groups, and farmers argued tariffs are taxes on Americans, raising prices and disrupting supply chains. Major retailers and manufacturers feared higher costs would force layoffs or price hikes, fueling inflation and reducing competitiveness. The agricultural sector, already hurt by past trade disputes, feared devastating losses from new retaliatory tariffs. Economists cited the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act as a cautionary tale, warning the plan could trigger a global recession. Their models predicted job losses and economic distress across the country if the tariffs were enacted. The Supreme Court's ruling brings immediate relief to consumers and businesses, averting a sudden spike in prices. The Federal Reserve avoids a new inflationary threat, and companies can plan without fear of overnight cost increases. Retailers and manufacturers, especially those reliant on imports, sidestep a crisis that could have forced layoffs or price hikes. Supply chains remain stable, and the holiday shopping season is spared disruption. However, domestic industries hoping for tariff protection now face tougher competition and may need to adjust their plans. Some U.S.-focused manufacturers saw stock prices dip after the announcement. Globally, America's trading partners can stand down from retaliatory measures, easing trade tensions. The decision opens the door for more constructive international negotiations. The court's decision reshapes the long-term trajectory of U.S. trade policy. By reaffirming Congress's role, it encourages more stable, deliberative trade strategies and reduces the risk of abrupt policy shifts. Businesses may find this environment better for long-term investment. Policymakers must now seek alternatives to broad tariffs, such as targeted incentives, workforce development, and stricter enforcement of trade laws. Yet the economic anxieties that fueled the tariff debate remain unresolved. If new policies fail to address job losses and wage stagnation, pressure for protectionism could return. The ruling creates a crossroads. Will America pursue global integration or renewed economic nationalism by other means? The Supreme Court's decision to block the Patriot Tariff initiative is a turning point in American economic history. It clarifies that Congress, not the President, holds primary authority over trade, averting a trade war and stabilizing the economy. The debate exposed deep divisions over America's role in the world economic nationalism versus global engagement. While the ruling sides with legal and economic caution, it leaves unresolved the anxieties driving protectionist sentiment. The focus now shifts to Congress and alternative strategies for supporting American workers and industries. The battle between protectionism and free trade moves to new ground. The nation faces a fundamental question: how to balance global integration with national interests in a rapidly changing world. The path America chooses will define its economic future for years to come.